just a lot of books that I have opinions on. I felt cheated on. I felt like I was just being baited into reading an entire series, and I fell for it because I read the entire thing. Gotta get my voice smooth and ready for whatever this rant is going to be. It's time to match the flowers. Hi guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of April. I had a funky reading month. I read the entirety of the Truly Devious series, so we're going to talk about that. I read some famous classics. I somehow managed to read 10 books. It's so stupid because I feel like I kind of like made it a thing on my channel that I don't read as fast as most people do. Like I talk about it fairly often that I'm a slow reader, and here I am just reading 10 books in 1 month. But hear me out, it's actually only 8 books because 2 of the books were essays. The other reason I've been reading so much is that I have just discovered audiobooks. Only 3 books that I read this month were physical books and the rest were all on audio, so that was a great thing to discover. I don't know why I'm trying to make excuses for why I read so much. I've just been on a reading kick and I'm living for it, so I hope I can kind of transfer some of that enthusiasm to you guys. Let's just get into the video. I got my trusty bullet journal here to see which books I read. Let's go! First book that I read this month is a dark academia classic, and that is If We Were Villains by ML Rio. I lent this one for my housemate because it's one of her favorite books. It is a classic dark academia that takes place at a boarding school for theater students. We follow a group of 6 friends that play all sorts of Shakespeare plays together, but the dynamics between them is a little bit off. There's some problems going on, and at one point one of them gets killed. I don't know what else to say about that, like that's a pretty big thing, like one of them gets killed, like it's pretty serious. And along with them, you're trying to figure out who did this and why it happened. This is one of those books that is especially great because of the characters. I loved reading about the dynamics between the friends, because you know I love books that have in-depth great characters, but in this book ML Rio did a fantastic job at also really showing how the different characters relate to each other and how they get along with each other. When I was reading this book I was very inclined to feeling like everything felt very dramatic, and it wasn't until I finished it that I kind of realized for myself that that's kind of the point, because this book is written in a very Shakespearean way, and Shakespeare is just very dramatic. So if this book feels very dramatic to you, that's the point of the story. It's trying to be Shakespearean. The characters are constantly playing in Shakespeare plays, which weave in perfectly with the actual storyline of the book. Very well done there. I'm gonna admit that I don't know a lot about Shakespeare, and reading all the plays that they were playing, I was kind of at a loss, but I do kind of like that after reading this book I just learned things about Shakespeare. The only things that I didn't really like about this book is that I felt like the main character of all characters was the least developed. He's kind of that void character that you can just insert yourself in as a reader. And I also do think the story could have been shorter because I think it's over 400 pages, and especially towards the middle I felt like I kind of already understood what was going to happen. I did enjoy this book. I think I gave it about like 3.5 stars. I think if you're a theater kid yourself, if you love acting and if you also really like Shakespeare, you're absolutely gonna whoa, great sentence. You're absolutely gonna love this one. Next up, I listened to the 2 feminist essays by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, We Should All Be Feminists, and also Dear Ijeawele, or A Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. Both of these essays are only an hour long if you're listening to it, so I'm not gonna go into them as much, but they are feminist essays by a Nigerian author. We Should All Be Feminists is a essay about why feminism is still very much needed, and I mostly really enjoyed it because it also really goes into how feminism is just so different and so much more needed in non-Western countries. If you've already read We Should All Be Feminists, I highly recommend just also immediately reading to her 15 suggestions thing, because that's like 15 suggestions on how to raise a child, a daughter. Basically just 15 feminist life tips. I gave both of these 4 stars, and all I can say about these is I just highly recommend them. They're very short, so just read them. The next book I listened to was Outspoken, which was another feminist little non-fiction story that I listened to. This one is mostly about why women get silenced and how to combat that. It's written by a voice coach, so she mostly gives a lot of like voice tips on how to be better at, literally be better at speaking, which I did really enjoy. Got some nice tips there. What I was disappointed in this book is that I was expecting a little bit more societal critique, but instead it was a little more focused on just the voice and the voice coaching. It's one of those non-fiction books that felt like it had a lot of filler content, so there were a few little studies and things that she mentioned that I found very interesting, like for example how women are less looked at during meetings, or that when women speak more during meetings they are seen as less intelligent, whereas when men speak more during meetings they're seen as more intelligent. So we can't really do anything right, can we? But those interesting things were kind of broken up and filled up with a lot of babbling. I felt like the story could have also just been an essay. A lot of those tips surround around working in an office and going to meetings and stuff, which I don't do, so a lot of these tips I couldn't really use. But I think if you do work in an office and you do struggle with these things, then it might be worth listening to. The only other thing that I was a little disappointed in is that it didn't really go into why all these things are happening and why these prejudices are there. It felt like one of those books that just comes to the conclusion of like, just breathe, just do it, you can do it, just go for it. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't really work. I did end up giving it 3 stars. It's just like a good fun read. Next up we have a classic. Finally read this book, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. The classic dystopian book, of which I thought it was the first dystopian book to ever be written, but it was actually Brave New World that came out like 10 years before 1984. And having read both now, I kind of think I prefer Brave New World over 1984. The thing is, I feel like everything that needs to be said about why this book is so great at critiquing totalitarian governments, pleading for critical thinking and thinking for yourself, I feel like everything that I could say has already been said. So instead, as to not make this video too long, I'm going to talk a little bit about the critiques that I have on this book. So one thing that I really didn't see coming is just how blatantly sexist this book is. So one of the main themes of this book is critical thinking, thinking for yourself. You know, the party is there to brainwash everyone, to make everyone believe the things that they want them to believe. The story emphasizes the importance of critical thinking and thinking for yourself. It's just very clear that in this book the women characters are the ones that don't seem to really get it and don't seem to really be able to fully resist. There's even one passage where the narrator literally states that it's mostly the women who swallow the party's lies and can think for themselves. And I was just like, no? Now I'm willing to forgive it because it's probably just a sign of the times, given that this book was written before the 60s, but I do think it's worth pointing out, especially since it's such a popular book. And the other thing I noticed is that I felt like this book really gave up a very essentialist message. Again, coming back to that theme of thinking for yourself, it's very clear that Winston, our main character, is one of the very few ones that is capable of resisting, of seeing through the party's lies, which is what he's trying to do throughout the entire book. We never really learn why he's capable of doing that instead of other people. It's just, he is. He just can. It seems to be implied it's just because he's like more intelligent than other people, but it's very unclear. I would find it very interesting if the book would go into a little bit more on why Winston was capable of resisting, whereas so many other people were so eager to just swallow the party's lies, because I'm pretty sure it's not just because they're dumb or a woman. I know right now it sounds as if I'm like very critical of this book. That's not the case. I still gave this like 4 stars. It's just that I think it's good to be a little bit critical about wildly adored books. I still highly recommend this book to everyone because it's just such a great story about authoritarianism, brainwashing, and like society. There's a lot of politics going on in this story. There's a lot of theories that are kind of laid out to you as the reader. But I was very pleasantly surprised by how fun this book is. It genuinely almost reads like a YA dystopian, because there's like a whole love triangle going on. They join a resistance. It's like pretty thrilling. So highly recommend this. Read it. It's good. Whew, I'm getting a lot of breath talking about these books, man. Ooh, the next one I read I actually have in physical form. So the next book that I read was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline. This is like a award-winning middle grade science fiction novel. It's about a girl named Meg who goes on this adventure with her little brother and I think like her neighbor, just like a guy she knows from school, and they go on this like intergalactic journey to find their father who is missing. This is just like a very fun science fiction story with weird villains and spaces that could be something out of like a Totally Spies episode or something. I like the fact that this is kind of like a children's story in which the main character, a girl, is really into science and maths. A lot of the locations that they travel to and enemies they face have something to do with like computers and IT and science. I think it's really great that there are books out there that can help girls get excited about science. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It was just like a fun, quick read. I don't think I'm going to continue with the series because honestly I feel no connection with any of the characters. They all felt just a little stale, but I did have fun. So now we're gonna move on to the entire series that I read in March, and that is the Truly Devious trilogy. I read them all. Oh boy, was that a ride. Oh, I need my water. Gotta get my voice smooth and ready for whatever this rant is going to be. So Truly Devious is the fantastic story of a special boarding school specifically made for people who have like really great talents, and our main character Stevie comes there with her talent and her love for detective work and crime and murder, which is especially handy because this boarding school is known for its mysterious murders that have happened in its history. Honestly, the idea of this book was so much fun, like so much fun. I cannot explain to you how much I loved reading about boarding school and all the different characters with their different talents and the murder mystery. It was wonderful. I read the first half of Truly Devious like in one evening because I just couldn't stop listening. Like this is one of the most addictive books that I've read in a long while, but it just went downhill rather quickly. A good example of this is the characters. All of the characters are fantastic. They're all very quirky, eclectic characters that you can't help but love instantly, but the thing is, they never move past their stereotypicality. So you would expect that over the 3 books that is this series, they would get a little bit deeper than just their shallow quirkiness, but it never happens. It's like, okay Nate, I get that you're antisocial and you hate people. It was funny the first 5 times, but not the 67. Some of you guys like on Twitter or on my comments said that all these characters feel like Tumblr aesthetic posts, and that is like the best description I've ever heard of these characters. So towards like the 3rd book, I was both annoyed with how shallow these characters remained, but I also couldn't help myself but love them. The same thing kind of happened with the romance. It's a train wreck. Like, oh my gosh. The love interest, David, is the worst person I've ever read about. Like, he is just genuinely an annoying person. All the other characters in the book agree with it. Stevie, our main character, agrees with it. He's an annoying, arrogant little man. But I couldn't help but ship them. It was just like, oh, David is so annoying. Oh, he's showing up in like a Sherlock costume. Hello, David. I was like not rooting for them at all. I didn't think they fit together at all. But then there would be a scene that would definitely be leading up to a kiss, and I was just like, oh my god, yes, get together. I just felt like I was being pulled left and right. Didn't know whether I had to hate it or love it, because like I said, it's so addictive, this series. So according to me, this is the biggest offender of the trilogy, and that is that it was a trilogy, because it should not have been a trilogy. It should have been 1 book. So you read Truly Devious, you're given all these riddles and mysteries and murders, and you can't wait to find the answers. Now you finish Truly Devious with 0 answers to any of the questions. Like, it takes the whole trilogy to get any kind of answers, and because of that, none of the individual books feel like their own books. It feels like I was just watching one long movie with 2 commercial breaks in between, instead of 3 separate stories. It was very clear that this was just one story that was just chucked into 3 bits. That genuinely makes me angry. When I finished the 1st book, I was upset. I was like, this is not how you write a story. You can't just write start a mystery story and then just like not end the story arc. what are you doing? I felt cheated on. I felt like I was just being baited into reading an entire series, and I fell for it because I read the entire thing. Every time a plot twist happens or a revelation, it's underwhelming. The thing with plot twists and revelations is they have to make a story move in a more interesting new way. The revelations in Truly Devious, they were shocking and unexpected, yes, but they did not make the story more fun. They made them less fun. Like, there are certain expectations that you get when you read about the mystery and the riddles, and then when you find out what's actually happening, it's all just very disappointing, in my opinion. So because of that, the series started out just like absolutely there in my enjoyment, and it just kept getting less and less enjoyable because it was going on for way too long, and all the revelations felt like huge disappointments or slaps in the face. But I did keep reading because the story was so addictive. I'm really scared that I'm gonna forget things that I wanted to say. Hello, it's editing me from the future because I completely forgot to talk about the things that I did really like about this book and I think this book needs some credit for. The first thing is the anxiety representation. The main character Stevie has anxiety, and through reading this book I really just learned to understand, or at least come close to understanding, what it feels like to live with anxiety, and I think it's wonderful for having that mental health rep. The other thing that I just really enjoyed about this book, like I mentioned how I really didn't like David and Stevie's relationship but also did like it, one of the factors in that is that it just reminded me of like being 16 and getting crushes on people like for reasons that you can't explain. The Truly Devious series does a really good job at explaining that like pubescent teenager feeling of just being ridden with hormones and feelings and not knowing what's going on, and by reading that and by reading how Stevie reacts to it, I just felt super nostalgic to that time, and I think it was done very well. Also, there is a side character who is non-binary, so there we have a little bit of representation with them as well, and those were just some things that I felt needed to be mentioned because I only talked about the things that I didn't like, but there were these things that I thought were really great. I gave the first two books 3 stars and the last book 2 stars, not necessarily because I think the last book was worse than the first two, but just to kind of symbolize that the story went downhill. I think if this trilogy was condensed into one big 500-page book, I would have absolutely gobbled that shit up. I would have loved it. Those are my opinions on this book. I'm just like angry and very happy at the same time. And then we move on to the last book. I did also read this one in physical form, but I don't have it with me. And that is The Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levenseller, aka one of my most anticipated books in a while. It has pretty high ratings on Goodreads for a new release. 5-star reviews like across the board. It was everything I ever wanted. It's about a girl named Alessandra who wants to become the queen of the kingdom, so she decides to seduce the ruling Shadow King, marry him, and then kill him so she can become queen, which sounds like everything my little heart has ever wanted. But I ended up being extremely disappointed in this book. Oh man, I have so many feelings. I made a separate review video for this one, spoiler-free, so I highly recommend watching that one. I talk about why I think this book needed more smut, not because I just want that, but because I had some kind of weird analysis theory around it. And I talk a little bit about how it failed to create anti-heroes. I made a little dumb sketch. So if you want to watch just like a ranty but still spoiler-free review, I highly recommend watching that one because I have just like a lot of opinions on this book and I think you might really enjoy this video. So check that one out. And I ended up giving The Shadows Between Us a 2 stars. I'm very pleased with myself that I managed to read 10/8 books. I didn't really give a lot of high ratings, like there were just a lot of books that I have opinions on. I think that my favorite book this month was 1984, and yet also I have to admit that I really enjoyed my time reading the Truly Devious series, even though it made me angry. Sometimes you just have that. Let me know what your favorite book was of this month, and I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one. Goodbye!